maybe he had something scheduled over this one and we should run it, but. All right, so John has started the recording. I can share the notes, I think. Make them a little bigger. So I think Mike is first on the agenda.
All right. Yeah, so I was basically, this is in the context of I would like to improve the gateway API, upstream API to get retries as part of HTTP route, so that we can eventually start being more comfortable pushing Istio users towards the gateway API configuration instead of virtual service. As part of that, I want to kind of like check in on what is the background context history of what looks like a handful of prior attempts to add budgeted retries. And the reason I care about this is budgeted retries is how Linkerd does retries, and having multiple implementations supporting that type of retry would make it easier to get consensus around an implementation in Gateway API that supports both Istio's needs as well as other meshes. So that's a long-winded explanation, and yeah, kind of open the floor. Would love to hear if there's any stumbling blocks that these hit or specific reasons why it was not added previously over these few attempts.
Well, at least one part of it is that in Istio, retries are attached to the route, but I think retry budget's associated with the cluster. So the Envoy API surface makes it kind of tricky to implement.
Is that still applicable when configuring things with the Gateway API interface?
The Gateway API, I think, is still doing an HTTP route, right?
Yes.
So it's like in gateway terms, like Envoy configures it on the back end, but the config is on the route. So we'd have to create like a backend per route, which then breaks other things and adds quite a bit of complexity. Okay. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not a trivial thing just due to the way that Envoy implements it.
Cool, that context helps.
We had some recent PR and some discussion about persistent session, and it was very similar about attachment to backend, attachment to routes. And the change was about making so that if a route, because a route typically has a set of backend, and if any of the backend has a setting to use session, then apply to the entire route, and the other way works as well. So I think that's probably a good thing to generalize one or another, meaning that treat route and the set of backends as being more or less morally equivalent, and attach policies to services if Envoy allows this, I mean, differentiation between services, or attach the policy to the entire route or to all the services pointed, or all the backend references in the set, if not possible. So again, we are limited by what Envoy can do, but as a API and policy model, I think it should be more or less equivalent to attach policies to route, implying that all backends get them, or apply policies to backend, implying that the routes pointing to that backend get them. If it makes any sense, I don't know.
I think that makes sense. Is the TLDR, it's possible, but it will take some work, or because of potential performance concerns, it's not a thing that we would want to do?
I don't think it's requiring a lot of work. I mean, the difficult part, in my opinion, is the semantics and agreeing between us that because we had a huge long conversation about presentations if they attach to listener, route, gateway, backend, And there is a lot of back and forth between the semantics of a backend policy and the semantics of a per route policy. My point is that if we can agree that to treat them more or less equivalent, meaning that route implies that all backends get a policy, backend, it's a bit debatable, but maybe if all backends have a policy, or I don't know what to do if we attach policy to the backend. But at least from API perspective, it's doable. And with session, it was not a big change. I mean, it was relatively, few lines of code to actually put the, because route generator has all the list of backends. You can see what label annotation you have. So it's not, doesn't sound difficult.
Okay, thanks. John?
It seems like it might be kind of fundamentally flawed in general. Like, imagine if I have two routes pointing to the same backend. If I treat the backend as one unit and I have conflicting rules on them, that you can't solve that, right? So the solution then is to say, well, the two backends are actually two different backends. But that's also broken because a group of backends shares common properties, right? You may have circuit breakers, you may have load balancing policies. So splitting them is also not valid. So I don't know a way around that other than moving the properties to not be tied to the backend and move them into the routes. Like the API and the proxy implementation have to be aligned is basically, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
John, I agree with you. That was really the point. That's why I'm pushing to attach policies to backends, not to routes, because you have the case of a route points to multiple backends, and that creates a conflict. Because if one route say a 1% session, one doesn't, which one do you pick? But if we attach policies to backend, we can infer that a route, if it points to 3 different backends with weight, traffic splitting, and everything else, we can assume that the policies should apply to all of them. I mean, I don't know how to express that we have a backend set. I mean, 3 services, V1, V2, and another service, all of them target of the route should be treated as having the same property and attached properties to the target ref of this route. And then any route that is using one of those backends would get the setting. Does it make sense? I mean, what you described earlier is a problem only if you attach policies to the route. And then, again, you don't know which one to use. But if you attach to backend, and if we agree that if one backend has the properties and all backends will have it, then it's whatever we can do to address this problem. If you have backend version 1, version 2, one with and one without the setting.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's kind of, it's the same problem, just inverted, right? You're saying I applied a policy to one backend and now it's applying to a different one. Like if you have a model, like if the API model doesn't meet the proxy model, you're going to have weird behavior like this. And we should decide whether we're okay with the weird behavior, or we're okay with not having the functionality, or we're okay with changing the proxy. I think those are the only 3 options.
Or a 4th option to introduce a new concept of, backend set or route target or something, which, because in reality, when you have a route, it's pointing to V1, V2, V3. It's not pointing to completely arbitrary search and I mean, at the same time. So if we had a concept of backend set where we can apply the CLC, basically it's what is part of the target ref, not the route, but the set of backends that are part of the same canonical service like we have it. I mean, we have the concept of canonical service, which applies here relatively well. It's a complicated problem.
We would need that concept in Gateway API, not just in the Istio API, right?
We kind of have it in Gateway API because in Gateway API, just say policies attached to things. Things, if we define a Istio canonical service resource as a proper, instead of annotation, have a proper concept of canonical service, and we attach to it Gateway API, it's happy. They don't care about it. It's a vendor extension.
Putting aside the question of introducing a new thing for a moment, the recently merged GEP on timeouts in Gateway API and adding those to HTTP route, has that been thought about or implemented in Istio yet? Because that what I think have a very similar problem as this.
So in that API and in Envoy, the retries are both attached to the route. So I think it's fine. And it's either implemented or there's a PR for it. I don't know if it was merged yet. That whole thing was kind of led by Frank, who works on Istio. So yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, anything in Envoy, it's naturally part of HTTP route. We should try to have policies attached to route. That's clear. I mean, if we have a choice.
okay, this is helpful. This gives me some things to think about and dig deeper on. Thanks.
All right. So next up, I think, is open telemetry. Is it Joao?
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Joel. How are you?
Yes, great. I'm good. Yeah, so I brought up this as a more or less as a follow-up from our last meeting. Basically there's I raised two issues more or less. The first one is the same as I brought up the first time. But the second, I don't know if you can open it so we can look at it together. But the second one basically is what we basically, I guess, agreed in the last meeting that it would be okay to adapt the current OpenTelemetry provider to allow for exporting via HTTP or allow configure the HTTP exporter in Envoy. So I created this issue just to as a tracker for that, and I think for that we are good, right, in moving that direction. I started implementing it and have some stuff done already that works, but I just wanted to get some ideas or what you guys think. I posted another comment with some in this issue. There's a comment with the API, new API config that will be needed, and I'm kind of struggling with the how to specify the HTTP headers because I looked at I didn't find any existing like generic type for it. And this is what I have today. And this is the, let's say, new config that is needed for configuring Envoy to export via HTTP. Yeah, but the header is a bit not sure. I found other config types that are doing something similar. They have this subtype defined for headers like this, and I just did it the same, but I'm not sure.
Is it something that Hotel already specifies? I mean, is it with the
Yes.
environment variables they have and all that? Because
So in Hotel, there is a specification for the protocol, and there is a exporter for HTTP and gRPC, and the default actually should be HTTP by the spec. And
I mean, add headers. I mean, specifically about add headers.
yes, and then there's also
Okay.
headers, and they have an environment variable for defining the headers as well in a specific format and so on.
They have the environment variables. I'm familiar with it, and I'm not entirely sure how we can fit them. So if you are in an OpenTelemetry environment, presumably there is some mutating webhook or something that OpenTelemetry is using to inject the environment variables into the workloads.
Yes, it could be, yes, but it could also be not, also not as well, yes.
Or user will explicitly set them. So my question is it possible for Istio to actually just respect the environment variable exactly as defined by OpenTelemetry with no changes on our side? So if you start a gateway or a workload and somehow the
I see what you mean. Yeah, no, yeah, even if we have the environment variable, that won't work because Envoy, unfortunately, is not using the C++ Hotel SDK. They have their own built-in functionality that does not follow
But
Hotel.
we have an agent that is passing whatever we want. So in Istio agent, which is starting Envoy, if it's in Bootstrap, it's already there. We generate the Bootstrap. We put a lot of Bootstrap configuration from environment variables. And if it's otherwise, we can send it to Istio and it can generate whatever is necessary. So what I'm trying to avoid is user having to do different things. I mean, if you are using random stuff, I mean, proxy gRPC, any application with OpenTelemetry built in using the SDK, you set the environment variables if you are per workload, and if you are using Istio, you set something completely different in mesh configure and per workload. I don't know what you are going to do. That was a piece of what I was trying to say last time about try to use whatever OpenTelemetry define and not invent some Istio specific configuration if we can avoid it. That was my.
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. So if you're using the OpenTelemetry SDKs in applications, then most of them, I think, support environment variables. I'm not sure if it's required. I don't think it's actually required to implement the environment variables. I think it's a recommended, but not required. But I think at this point, maybe all of them support. But as I said, in Envoy, they don't follow the hotel. They
Sure.
rolled up their own thing.
But we can do it for them. I mean, it's not necessary that Envoy does it. It's not very difficult. I can show you the code in Istio agent is generating the bootstrap. I'm pretty sure this ends up in the bootstrap. So it's a relatively very simple change to use the environment permissions. And then if it's recommended, I mean, why not? I mean, it's a recommendation. We should do it. It doesn't have to be required to use it.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that users should define the environment variable in whatever they deploy Istio, and then Istio passes this environment variable to Envoy somehow. What?
That's my suggestion, because in this way, we already have ability to customize the injection template, so we can inject the environment for them. OpenTelemetry provider, vendors, whatever, probably will have mutating webhooks that will inject the environment variables into applications, because it's not hard to add a mutating webhook that injects environment variables, and then all workloads get them. And both of them will work relatively well with relatively good granularity, because or user can explicitly put the environment variables which are well defined, well known, and it will be exactly the same if they, because most likely if you have tracing, you probably also have tracing in your application with SDK, because Envoy sidecar is generating some traces,
Right.
but
Yes.
doesn't have all the information from inside. So you will have to put the environment variables no matter what. And then you don't have to worry about Istio is one way and the application is a different way, and keeps them in sync. And if you have a center, it's getting very messy for a user.
Yes. No, I agree. Yeah, from our experience, there is definitely people that prefer the environment variables, and they configure everything with environment variables. So for them, it would make sense that we also do the same here. I completely agree. But there's also people that don't use environment variables for some reason. And then I wonder if we should also still have an option for those to support those cases where they don't have the environment variables.
Absolutely, we want to have them. And I think there is a discussion in OpenTelemetry about, I think there is a configuration working group or something.
Yeah, it's way long to it's very early on. So,
well, what we're discussing here is relatively, but I mean, we can start with a prototype, we can work with them. My concern is exactly the same about having a CRD that is actually common for applications and for Istio, and it's I mean, whatever configuration it is, it should not be an Istio configuration, definitely not in a mesh config configuration. It's something that users should be able to configure for both workloads and sidecars and gateways. And we can propose something that, we can start the discussions there with this configuration if you want it, or whatever CRD we want it. But I don't want to be under Istio.io namespace. I mean, maybe they can accept an experimental CRD that we propose, or
yeah, the real issue for us is that I guess you know that Envoy is deprecating open tracing or already deprecated open tracing, and I guess I mentioned, but not sure if but I'm working for Dynatrace, and we already have an offering for instrumenting and monitoring Envoy in Istio, but it's based on this open tracing offering in Envoy, and that is going away. And of course, all of our customers are affected by this, so they won't have it anymore. And I agree that should be a standard way of configuring things, but yeah, that won't go anytime soon, and we need a decision, or we need a solution, because I think it's January, Envoy is gonna remove the dependencies from OpenTrace, and then everything will break.
so they're removing open tracing
for some intermediate way, because and for example, with the approach that I've suggested last time of having our own tracing provider, then I would need I wouldn't need this extra type or HTTP header, because we would just pass it internally or configure it internally in our extension in Istio, so that won't be an issue for anybody. But since that we said we want to use the hotel things, and hotel specifies headers, and the exporters also in the SDK also allow for users configuring them like this manually, not just via environment variables. So I think it's still, let's say, compliant with everything. It's not something new or anything like that.
Can I ask you, what is the current configuration for the one that is going deprecated? Can you just use that and translate it to OpenTelemetry? I mean, whatever you have there.
No.
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 Ah.
No. That's completely incompatible. No. Yeah.
So I don't mind having a new CRD. I know some people. I mean, that's my personal opinion. Again, I think having CRDs for that are shared is probably better than extending mesh config. But we can start with a CRD in Istio and propose it, and as long as the discussion is ongoing and it's clear that eventually we'll migrate to a standard CRD for configuring OpenTelemetry that is owned by OpenTelemetry, I don't mind if we do some preliminary work in Istio as a prototype or whatever.
Okay, and yeah, I don't have much idea how that could go forward. Do you, any of you, can point me or guide me on how this we could get this moving?
Did you start the discussion with the OpenTelemetry folks on either on the configuration? I mean, you're a provider, tracing provider, so you probably should have.
Yeah, there is a working group for that is working on the configuration, but they are targeting SDK configuration, and I'm not part of the group, and I honestly I don't really have the bandwidth now to tackle another group because I'm already involved into semantic conventions and other things, and I'm also involved in let's say fixing this gap that we'll have now because of the open tracing deprecation in Envoy. So I would love to, but I don't really have time to participate on that now.
Can you open an issue at least? I mean, I'm probably going to join that working group as well, and hopefully some other people from Istio join that working group because it affects us as well.
Maybe you could open because I guess you have more context in the Istio side. What you think would be needed or something? You can just open on the specification repo or something, and then I guess because I think you probably have more context.
Yes. Okay. Let me try to. I think the meetings are Mondays for that working group, for the config working group in OpenTelemetry. I'll see if I can add the topic to that, or open an issue on their side. I already discussed with some folks from Google who work on OpenTelemetry and asked about this question, and I don't think anyone objected strongly. But let's again. I think if you do the work for environment variables, at least you will unblock yourself and you'll allow use, and that's settled. I mean, it's very well defined there. It's a stable API, so users using environment, and I'm pretty sure we can solve it for the waypoint as well.
But there's a lot of going on in the comments. Maybe we should go address
Yes.
those.
Yeah, so one of the main comments in the chat was, I think Austin was proposing feel relatively strongly using environment variable to config this, but we have to figure out how to do it with ambient, right, with the waypoint proxy. So that's most of the discussion was about.
Can John confirm, because I'm pretty sure John added the annotations, and the annotations are propagated to deployments, and deployments, we already have an annotation that allows setting environment variables on proxies. John, if you're still around.
For Kubernetes gateways or for general?
For
Kubernetes gateways in general,
Istio, is it Istio waypoint as the type? Class type?
I think we actually intentionally turned that off on those because we wanted to push users towards using the proxy config beta API. But it could be added.
We can add it back. I mean, for sidecar, definitely we have it, so it's fine.
The proxy config is for header, John. This is the environment variable.
The proxy config also has environment variables.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, it was, the idea was to avoid annotations, but again, let's not be too. I mean, we can add annotations back. We are not blocked it's not a hard problem.
I think on the gateway side, we should have a much larger conversation about gateway customization. I'm hesitant to just carry forward all of the proxy config magic that happened with sidecars. I'd like to rethink those and carry forward what makes sense, but actually come up with a policy that makes sense for ambient rather than just a straight carry forward.
So my point here is that for workloads in particular, environment variables are standardized that V1 are stable, are settled. I mean, all SDKs implement them. Using environment to configure workloads, it's a done deal as far as I know. There will be also a configuration, but as we're discussing, that's already just starting in OpenTelemetry, and that will be a proper API for, attached to gateways, attached to whatever. So that's going to happen. In between, I don't think it's a big deal to have some more backward compatibility with, in ambient with what we are doing for the other one. Sorry, Whitney, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, Costin, to expand more on your suggestion to use a new CRD. I like the idea of not adding new configuration options for mesh config. So I'm curious if you have more reasons for suggesting that, as well as does everyone in the community agree with that approach too?
So my suggestion is actually, so step back, the OpenTelemetry project, they define two configurations. They define how to configure the SDK, which currently is the environment variables, and they define how to configure the collectors, which include exactly what we need here, which is how to send to different tracing providers, how tracing providers are defined, how metric providers, and so forth. There is an effort, I believe, to standardize this configuration, and my proposal to the OpenTelemetry working group is also to define it as a CRD. And if they define it as a CRD, we should adopt it, just like we should adopt the semantic convention, we should adopt the protocol, and we should adopt the entire thing, because that's the benefit of standards in this. Yes, John.
But I feel like we're putting a bit too much weight on the idea that a community that we're loosely involved in might propose a CRD that they've said that they're not pursuing. It could happen, but should we really put so much weight on this?
CRD, I mean, there are two parts. I mean, one is the name of the CRD and the fact that it says, the Open API spec and CRD spec. And the other thing is the content. The content is kind of settled in OpenTelemetry. I mean, in OpenTelemetry collector, if you want to send traces to whatever, you put that configuration in a clear format that is relatively stable, because already, OpenTelemetry collector is relatively used. And we can take exactly that format and turn it to CRD. I mean, it's a struct with, fixed names. We can wrap it in a CRD. We can keep it as alpha until a proper organization adopts it. I don't think they are against having a CRD. It's just that it's not their focus and nobody's working on it.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how much the collector config would apply to, I don't know what they call not collectors, I don't know, but we're not
for the
application.
Oh, sorry, Lei has a hand up.
Yeah, I'm also against the adding to the mesh config, and I prefer also CRD. And if the CRD from OpenTelemetry is not OpenTelemetry working group is not ready, we can add one, right?
Yeah, so I honestly don't know anything about CRD or how this could be done in Istio somehow, but if you see that if the community thinks that that's the way to go, then we can see. But I'm just really afraid that that most of this will take a while to be implemented. And as I said, the support is going away and probably will hurt more people than just Dynatrace. And I don't know if how that how that interval will be. But yeah.
No, but I hope we agreed that we should also support environment variables and they are settled, they are stable, and so forth. Can we start with environment variables that will resolve the immediate problem?
Yeah, there will be more things. That's the other issue that issue that I commented, that I put it there, because we are adding more features to Envoy related to OpenTelemetry, which are the resource detectors. So this is a concept that Hotel has, and also samplers, so an ability to configure different samplers. So we already got the initial foundation merged into Envoy. So there is a environment resource detector that reads from an environment variable specified by Hotel, and there is also the always on sampler, a very basic one. And those also need to be configured in Envoy in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, that is also something that needs to be provided somehow. And in the other issue that I had there, I left a comment with how it looks like, more or less, if you want to take a look. But if this is also something that you think it's solved by somehow a CRD or the telemetry API somehow, then yeah, that we can take a look and go that further. But yeah. But I'm just afraid that because I don't know much about Istio and all these things, and I fear that I won't have the context for doing some deep work, and unless there's somebody that can help me out or something, then I can do it. But probably alone, I won't be able to figure all this out by myself.
Yeah, I think I understand your concerns, and I agree with you that we need to do something about it. But I'm afraid we went this path many times in the past. We invented something that is Istio specific and didn't take into account the rest of the world. And for telemetry in particular, or tracing in particular, it is very, very bad if tracing is misconfigured between sidecar gateways and workloads, because then you cannot correlate the spans, and it's getting very messy. So anything that we do needs to take into account that apps trace too. So that's and if you have, pretty much everything, it's correlated. That's the whole point of tracing, to correlate.
Yes, of course. Yes.
I don't mind, and if we keep what the user have to do consistent, so they don't have to translate from keywords to different keywords, different structure and everything, I wouldn't mind even put it in mesh config if it's exactly the same thing that is used in the OpenTelemetry collector, for example. And eventually have the same thing. But my concept is not the envelope, if it's how it's named, if it's CRD or it's in mesh config. It's the structure of the configuration. So user can just cut and paste that thing in both OpenTelemetry collector and mesh config or annotation on the gate or whatever.
That we can do, yes. That's no problem, yes.
It's also not very clear if we want the global setting, or how important it is to have a global setting versus specifying it per workload. Normally, if you want global, you just deploy OpenTelemetry collector and you just point to OpenTelemetry collector, and it can do pretty much everything that you need.
Yeah, to align the config, that's no brainer. We can do it. It's yeah. And yeah, I think the concern really for me is that relying on something there that I know that it's going to take a while, and yeah.
As you see here, it takes a while as well. I mean, it's not like Istio, you just merge it and it works. we tried this before.
Of course, yes.
And they seem to have more expertise in telemetry than we have, because there are other vendors related to telemetry. And next month we'll have someone from another vendor of telemetry that will want to add another slightly different thing. So it's better to discuss in the forum with OpenTelemetry vendors, in my opinion.
So regarding the sort of urgency here and the removal of this feature from Envoy, we operate on our own custom build of Envoy today. Is it feasible to continue including this feature in our build of Envoy until a suitable replacement is found?
The suitable replacement is already found. It's the Hotel one. That's what Dynatrace wants to go for. So we already picked that we want to go support full Hotel, but the only thing that let's say is missing for us is because we don't support gRPC, so we added the HTTP exporter in Envoy. And also with our agents, which will go away because of the integration is gone, we do a lot of enrichment, for example, figuring out the data about the process, about the host, and things like that. And all of that is also now going to be integrated into Envoy via this resource detectors feature that Hotel supports. So like we already enhancing Envoy to have, let's say, all the features Hotel native that we will need to have the replacement, which is full Hotel in our case.
Okay.
When exactly is Envoy going to remove open census?
It's already deprecated, and I think it's going to be removed in the next release. I think which is happening January or February, something like that.
So we would pick that up in 121 probably.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think Istio open source should not pick it up and continue maintenance. It's just not something we should commit to. Like we don't have resources to support upstream. The issue is not of the extension, it's to the upstream library. However,
Yes.
I mean, some vendors may continue so, and I think Google probably will continue using open census, but not in the context of open source.
Yes, exactly. We will also allow ingesting open tracing data, open census, but the library is deprecated upstream. So yeah, that was their goal of removing it because it's unmaintained now.
So, Kit, on the discussion about we have a telemetry API, I agree we should discuss it, but telemetry also has the telemetry API. And if we use OpenTelemetry, it's not clear why users would want an API that only works if they use a sidecar, and it breaks if they use the OpenTelemetry SDK that is linked to their application. And why, if they use a different gate or use a different implementation or use whatever else, they will end up with two different telemetries working in different ways and not compatible with each other. We need to support the telemetry, we need to promote it to beta, whatever, but we also need to accept that we do not own telemetry space, and there is another CNCF project that is focused on defining telemetry standards and telemetry protocols and telemetry whatever, and we are not it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But I do think that we should discuss more, maybe park this conversation. I think we've got a couple other topics and are starting to run out of time a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as Keith. Time box this one, and
Can you give me some how can I move forward with this? Should we continue the discussion somewhere else? Should I, for example, try to align with the collector and let's try like that to start or something?
Can you start with the environment variables?
I can take a look at that, yes. But there's the other, yeah, we won't have time anyway. But there's the other issue that I think that also has a similar problem, and I don't think those can be solved with the environment variables, which is the configuration of the sampler and resource detectors. There's no environment variables for those.
For that, definitely you need to work out. I mean, how will they be set up? Find out how they will be set up in SDK on an application, and then we can adopt whatever they do.
Would it be okay if we start a chat or something in the Slack channel so we can have
Yeah,
some
sure,
progress?
that sounds good. But also start in OpenTelemetry, because again, you are trying to define OpenTelemetry features, not Istio features.
Yes, but as I said, yeah, I can try, but the OpenTelemetry won't get done in any 6 months or so. So we can't wait for that to get support for HTTP and all the features. I can definitely try, but I work there for the other repos, and I know for sure that they won't have the time to work on this anytime soon. and the configuration is really early on. It just probably some time ago they just finished defining the format and still like very, very early on,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Let's have a separate discussion. Maybe we can discuss it next time as well. I think the main objection is I mean, I personally don't mind creating a new CRD, and as an alpha, if there is a clear plan to move it to, I mean, it's just an experimental vendor support for open telemetry, and there is a plan to move to V1 in telemetry. But we need to convince John and a few others that seem to have strong objections to creating new CRDs.
Okay, I will create a chat on Slack and invite some of you, and then we can continue the discussion there. Sorry for taking too much time on this.
Thanks, Joel, for joining. Appreciate it. Sanjeev, I think you're up next with the office hours proposal.
Okay. This is a action item I had in one of the ambient meetings since we had talked a few times about the office hours that people were interested in, and I was asked to kind of put together a draft proposal. So I've done that and open for comments on sort of the details here. I could either go through some of the points right now or just let you guys look at it and provide comments later. But basically the point is about maybe every once in a couple of weeks, having a relatively open forum targeted at mostly new community contributors, but really also anybody, and focused on understanding the code, understanding functionality, and just growing the community and making it easier for people to contribute in whatever way. And some other communities also have similar office hours. So if you guys want to add comments here, and we can finalize over the next week or so.
Sanjeev, have you attended our community meeting in the Istio community?
I've attended some, but I've mostly attended the ambient lately. So I'm a new community member myself, and so I thought this was useful for me as well.
So these meetings are work group meetings. They're more or less expected to be mostly contributors in these meetings, working on building new Istio features, getting releases moving, fixing bugs, etc. There's also a monthly community meeting, which is run by the Istio Steering Committee. And that sounds very similar, if not quite the same as what you're trying to propose here. It's designed for end users to join and hear what's happening in the Istio community. It usually has one end user presenting something that they've been able to accomplish with Istio or build on top of Istio. It doesn't usually have maintainers or contributors as a rule who are there to answer questions, although I'm thinking that this proposal might make sense like as just a small modification to how we run our community meeting already.
Maybe so. Actually, this was already, even before my proposal, somebody had already proposed this, and I think there was some loose agreement on having it. So presumably some people already felt like this was a different scope than that meeting. I don't know if one or others can comment, but this is not the first time this is being proposed. Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, so I appreciate you, Sanjeev, picking this back up. This was suggested a while ago, and I think just got lost among other things. But I pushed back a bit on this being kind of part of the community meeting. Mitch, as you mentioned, the community meeting is very much focused on end users and figuring out how Istio being used in the wild, demos of different use cases. Whereas this office hours is really about Contrib X. It's really about enhancing and improving the contributor experience, having a place for people who are working on Istio issue to get help and support when they're stuck, being able to get face time with maintainers, mentorship, that sort of thing, and just speaking to the elephant in the room, Istio really needs more new maintainers. There haven't been a lot of new maintainers being added recently. I think going even back as far as the last year, net new maintainers. So not talking about working group transplant, somebody adding a new working group, but a net new maintainer. There have not been very many. And for a project as complex as Istio, and with some of the folks, several long-term contributors moving into different roles where they're no longer involved in the project recently, it's something that I think we need to very much prioritize and emphasize for the health of Istio, something that we're all very much invested in. And so, I want to just couch some of this proposal with that context, because yes, it's time commitment from maintainers. Recognize that. Yes, there is some level of quote unquote overhead of running a new meeting and dedicating time and working with people. But we're talking. I think that this is a topic that really is going to determine the future of the project, and I want to make sure folks are giving it that sort of consideration. So just wanted to clarify and disambiguate why I personally think that this is a very much like a separate conversation, a separate purpose than the community meeting.
That makes sense to me. Eric?
Yeah, so I was pretty much going to say the same thing Keith said. So thanks, Keith, for articulating most of that. I did have at least 3 people come up to me in the Istio kiosk at KubeCon, and basically, yes, the contributor experience is something that we seem to be lacking in. And I know I did have a little talk with Justin about this as well. So I do know it's on the steering committee radar. And I was asking because I was sort of thinking, how could I, move something like this forward? So, thanks, Sanjay, for picking this up and doing that. I certainly think it's a valuable thing that I think we need to do, and I do think it's separate than the community call. My concern is I don't want it to become a solve everybody's Istio issue call. It's not a replacement for that, but certainly I want it to be something where somebody is having issues. So a lot like our Contrib Fest stuff. Somebody's having issues. How do you set up your development environment? How do you join a work group? How do you figure out who the work group leads are? I mean, a lot of that's simple, but we probably have a hard time articulating it well. And I think, having this group set up will also feed into updating the wikis and getting some other documentation out there as well that is probably lacking at this point. So just my couple of bonus points why I think this is a good idea.
With that clarification, I think I would be in favor of something like this. It definitely sounds like it's got a distinct purpose. Sorry that I missed that when you explained it, Sanjeev. Yeah, I think it makes sense to have a Contribex meeting that helps people get started. One thing I have seen in the past with similar efforts is that we get one of these meetings up and running, and then the only people who attend them are the new contributors, that we don't actually have coverage from our existing maintainers. So maybe as we try to set this up, could we pick a start date and get a sign-up sheet and promote sign-ups among existing Istio maintainers? That way we know we have coverage, because the last thing we want to do is tell contributors, hey, we're going to help you, and then they're left alone in a video call for an hour without any actual help.
Yeah, no, I think the format I'm proposing is having a panel of at least 1 or 2 people who are experienced in the community, and we will pre-sign up. We will have a sign-up sheet, and we'll have a coordinator to kind of make sure that we are signing up people, and we can pre-parse some of the questions as well, and have experts that have expertise in those particular areas. So, yeah.
Nice. I like it.
So yeah, just add any comments if you have, and we can make it more specific and get it going.
Sanjeev, when you're ready to get something actually on the calendar, you can reach out to me on Slack. I have right access to the Istio calendar and can help get that set up.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, Sanji, I think this is great. It would be really cool if we can get this going. I just want to remind you, after MBA meeting, there is a product security working group meeting, so it may not be a good time.
Yeah, finding the right time is going to be one of the things. I think I was talking to Eric yesterday, and he mentioned this as a possibility because a lot of community calls are on Wednesdays. But yeah, we can have it on Mondays, whatever. Yeah, so add your comments on preferred times, and we can iterate, and we can start with something, and if it doesn't work, we can change it. Also thinking of once in every 2 weeks to start with. We can increase or decrease it based on experience.
Awesome.
Did we leave you enough time at the end, John?
Yeah, it's fine. I just want to point to this PR. We talked about what we're doing with Istio, Cuddle, Operator Helm stuff. This is one step in what I think is the right direction. Might be a bit controversial, so please check it out. Basically, a quick 1-minute summary is we used to install this Istio operator in the cluster that's called installed state. And the only thing I've ever seen it used for is to bring confusion to users. Because they see it and they think that it's actually representing what's installed, which is not true. It's representing what was installed at one point, and they modify it and they think it's going to change something, and it doesn't. They see Istio operator CRD and think they have an operator, so they apply the Istio operator file instead of doing Istio cuddle install. It doesn't do anything. It just causes great confusion, basically. And it doesn't really have that much value. So this PR removes that. One step closer to doing less magic things in install.
You've got support from me. This trips me up multiple times, and I have to remind myself that it's useless for a non-Istio operator install every time I see it. So +1.
So if people are using in-cluster operator, this will still remain to be
Yeah, this
useful,
has absolutely
or
no changes for those users. It's only for
Okay.
the Istio cuddle install users.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Because those users might have some automation around this. Yeah, too bad. We sent out the survey, but we didn't ask the in-cluster operator question. We should have asked.
All right. If nobody has anything else, we give people a couple minutes before the next meeting.
See you in 5.
Bye, everyone. Thanks. And thanks, Whitney, for taking notes.